This video was brought to you in part by the supporters of the AMTV Patreon. Thank you. Hello everybody and welcome back to AMTV Radio. This is the podcast where I'm joined by a very special guest each time and we chat about whatever on earth we would like to. And today I am joined by someone who is a writer and has been for many years, a playwright, has written for radio, television, audio, a lot of things. And we're going to try and delve into as much as possible today. I am joined by Stephen Wyatt. How are you, Stephen?
I'm fine, thank you very much. Nice to be here.
Oh, Brill, thank you for coming. And as I say, I'm sure some of the audience listening might be aware of yourself and some of your work, but perhaps for the contingent that might not be as familiar, do you just want to tell us a bit about yourself and what it is that you do?
Yes, well, I'm a playwright mostly. I suppose I'm probably best known in the world for 35 years ago. I wrote two Doctor Who stories, one called Paradise Towers and the other called Greatest Show in the Galaxy, which, to my amazement, still arouse interest and even some controversy. So that's okay. But I had a long period when I did a great deal of radio work, both original plays and also a lot of adaptations. Yeah, Raymond Chandler, Vanity Fair, Dante's Divine Comedy, which is my craziest project. Very great fun. And at the moment, I'm back with my greatest love, which is theatre. And I have a tour of a new play called Two Cigarettes in the Dark, commencing at the Chichester Festival Theatre next February, starring the wonderful Dame Penelope Keith. So that's nice. A big boost, and I'm very much looking forward to that.
No, that'll be wonderful. And I mean, already, if anyone listening is around the area, definitely go and check that out next February. I'll try and get down for it myself, travel permitting, and if the pandemic finally goes away, so properly anyway.
We hope so, yeah. It does a tour, so it goes to quite a few other places.
Oh, lovely.
So it goes to Bath, Brighton, Richmond, Guildford, Cardiff, Malvern. I think there's one I haven't mentioned, but anyway, it's a 9-week tour. So there's quite a few opportunities to grab it if you're within reach of those places.
Absolutely. Oh, that's fantastic. Well, we'll talk more about the new play a bit later on, but I just wanted to ask Stephen, going back, what got you into this whole industry or writing, if you like, specifically? Because I guess everyone has a different story, don't they? You have those who feel, they knew they wanted to do it since they were small. You have some who, I guess, fell into it by accident. So what's your story behind getting into all this?
Well, as a kid, I always filled notebooks with stories, and they were mostly plays and stuff. And I did, when I was at university, I wrote some review sketches, and at the end of that time, I wrote my first full-length play, but I didn't ever think I was going to become a full-time freelance writer. I was going to be an academic, and I spent a certain amount of time, not very long, in a drama department. And I just found out it wasn't for me. So I sort of launched out into this sort of strange, unsettling world where you never know quite what's going to happen next. Yes. And I've sort of ducked and dived ever since.
Like a true creative.
Well, you do. I think you have to. A very nice radio writer, Nick Warburton, said you need 3 things to succeed, which are talent, determination, and luck.
Yes. Yeah, I wouldn't disagree.
And I think a lot of luck comes out of determination, frankly. You've just got to try and keep going. I had an interesting start because the first thing I did, I worked with the Belgrade Coventry Theatre and Education team as their resident writer for a year. And I think that was good because you were writing for kids, and kids demand things that keep their attention.
Yes, yeah.
And that's a very good part of the learning process. Don't go on too long. keep things moving. So I suppose that's always been one of the guiding principles.
Yeah. Don't they always say kids are the toughest audience because they don't sugarcoat anything, do they? If they don't like something, they'll say it, and like you say, holding their attention. I mean, I've done various schools tours, whether it's educational stuff or pantomime, and like you say, the speed at which you have to get through things because you see it, don't you? If it goes on too long, you just see their faces flagging, they're not paying attention. So, but I agree. I think it's a good testing ground for anything really to do it to children.
I mean, the first time I wrote a play for the Unicorn Theatre for Children at one point, and my director said the important thing is something interesting has to happen every 3 minutes.
Yes, yeah.
So yeah. I think it's good. It's a good thing for Doctor Who as well.
Absolutely, yes, yeah. Works for a lot of things, I suppose, when you put it in context. Yeah. But so moving into, I guess, just from reading on your website as well, your first bit of television work just before Doctor Who, I believe, was a project called Claws in 1987.
Right. That was actually the only original play for television I've done.
Sure.
It was about a power struggle within a cat club. And it was based in part of experiences my mother had getting involved in a pedigree and all the battles and intrigues and sabotage that went on. And it had a lovely cast. Which was headed by Brenda Blessing and Simon Jones, both of whom wonderful actors. So it was very good fun. And yes, it was my calling card for Doctor Who as well.
Yes. So when you wrote Claws then, because obviously I guess the landscape of television, or the industry as a whole, if you like, has shifted over the last 30 years. So was it a case of, could you just submit your script for Claws to someone at the BBC, or was it, what was the process, I guess, of getting it to the screen?
The process was that I submitted, because producers then had slightly more autonomy than they do now.
Yeah.
I submitted a proposal to a script editor I knew and his producer, and they presented the idea to the department, and the department commissioned it, and then there's a lot of coming and going, and then they gave the go-ahead for it to go ahead. I mean, it seemed very protracted at the time, but when you hear about what happens on feature films, it went very speedily indeed.
Yes,
but the odd thing was, that it was in the can a year before Paradise Towers, but actually I think it went out afterwards, or within about a week.
Okay, so that's interesting, because I was going to ask, again, before you said that, assuming Claws was the first one that went out, but if it was Doctor Who, I suppose it works the same. But what was that like for you then, as a young writer at the time, sort of seeing your work, your name on the television screen, on BBC One?
It's very strange, because I think by that point in the process, you sort of slightly, it's got a life beyond you.
Yes, yeah.
It's not you sitting alone in front of your screen, or in that point it was a typewriter,
yes.
Imagining things. By the time it's gone through all those processes, it feels something slightly, I don't mean this in a bad way, it's something outside you.
Yes.
That you feel in a way sometimes feel a bit detached from, for that reason.
Sure, yeah.
I recently...
Yeah.
I recently replayed for the first time, because the Blu-ray came out. I hadn't watched Paradise Towers for about probably over 20 years, And I thought, oh, really? Is that what happened? Gosh.
Yeah. Oh, well, I mean, nice segue into Paradise Towers, which, of course, as you say, was your first Doctor Who commission. And I suppose at that point in the show's history, with Sylvester coming in as the new Doctor, and the show was in a bit, I think it's fair to say, behind the scenes, the show was in a bit of a tough spot with upper management of the BBC. I think it's well known now that some of the higher ups weren't too keen on it, so they weren't too interested in, promoting it, putting it in a good time slot. So for you then, when Andrew Cartmel or John Nathan Turner, when they reached out to you, did they give you much indication of what they wanted Paradise Towers to be, or were they literally like, we've got 4 episodes, write something?
Well, it was somewhere between the two. The starting point was that I sent a clause to John Nathan Turner, and he passed it on to Andrew, who was then a new script editor.
Yes.
And I frankly could not have walked through the door of the Doctor Who office at a better time, because Andrew was very keen, very bright, and very much open to new ideas. He was more interested in good writing than in somebody who'd written science fiction before.
Mm-hmm.
And that was great for me, because I'm not fundamentally a science fiction writer.
Yes. Yeah.
And I've said this quite a few times. I really find all this Gallifrey Time Lord stuff really rather boring. I don't care about it. I don't even find the Daleks that interesting. Although I'm old enough to have, cowered when they first came in. Yeah. Great image, but at this point, if somebody said, "Would you like to write a story in the Daleks?" with it, I just couldn't do it. So we felt that the whole series had become very, very introverted, and it was, as I said, you had to have a PhD in Who studies to understand what the hell was going on. And I said, well, I'm old enough to have seen the first episode when it went out. And as far as I was concerned, it was about a man and a companion in a phone box who went places and had adventures. And that, to me, is the basic concept. And all the other stuff that's accumulated since is, to me, comparatively not very interesting. So it was great. I was there exactly the right moment. We were really, really up against it in terms of time. I ended up writing the first drafts of episode 2, 3, and 4 of Paradise Towers in 6 days.
Wow. No easy feat. Yeah.
So because that's what we really had. Andrew had acquired with the job a script by Pip and Jane Baker, and I don't think it's very much of a secret that they all didn't get on.
Yes. Yeah.
And that Andrew felt like I was his first writer, if you see what I mean.
Yes. Yeah.
And he, as you know, he created a team of writers, all Ian Briggs, Graham Curry, Ben Aronovitz. So there was a feel around his office of writers meeting, chatting, stuff. It was a very creative period, but we didn't really have much time to think about what we were doing.
Yes, yeah.
And interestingly, when I started, the Doctor hadn't been cast. So I started writing a script with a rather generic character called the Doctor.
Yes, yeah.
And it was only a way into the process that Sylvester was cast, and were able to make a few changes. But it's for Sylvester, it was slightly too wordy a script. I think when I got to Greatest Show in the Galaxy, I was much more able to cater it to Sylvester, whose theatre work I knew, and I knew what that part of his personality and the juggling and all that sort of skills. So actually juggling wasn't one of his skills. It was because I knew he'd done all this circus tricks and stuff when he was touring. So I put them all in, and they were all fine, apart from the juggling. He'd never juggled in his life. So
that surprises me. You'd never guess when watching it, though, would you? He's not too bad at it. So
he's a true pro. He took it seriously. But anyway, so that was slightly odd in that therefore, there's a lot of talk now about how the Doctor was developed and Sylvester. In a way, a lot of what happened in Paradise Towers was decided before we even knew who the Doctor was going to be.
Yes, yeah, and I think a lot of writers, like you say, I think Pip and Jane Baker had the same issue when they wrote that opening story. They didn't know or I think they might have even thought it was still going to be Colin Baker at that point, and then obviously it changed. But I think Paradise Tower shows what you said earlier, about the whole, how for yourself as a writer, you don't find like the whole, the Time Lord, the whole backstory that interesting. But I think that is so refreshing in Paradise Towers, though, because like you say, there's none of that. It's just they turn up and they have this adventure. And I think as a viewer as well, like myself at least, like you don't want all that, the lore of it. If you don't want that every single week. It's nice just to have an adventure where they get involved in the thick of it and then they have to find a way out of it. So I think it absolutely works for the best. I know you're saying, like, you know, you wrote it for a generic Doctor at the time because, you know, you weren't sure of who was going to be cast. But I think, whether it was a change you yourself made or Andrew or Sylvester on the shooting day, there's that one scene, I think, where, you know, the Doctor's sat with the two caretakers who are watching him and he tricks them into letting him go. That's, to me at least, that screams Sylvester, that whole, you know, comedy, duping or manipulation. So, I think he found his feet in it quite well.
He did indeed. I mean, I think that scene was in the original script beforehand, you know, but the one detail is definitely Sylvester, is when they arrive on the planet and there is this sort of rusting sort of pump standing there. Yeah. And he talks to it, and says hello, and Mel said, "Oh, Doctor," and he said, "Well, you never know." That's a Sylvester improv, and I think it sort of gives you a feel of how he was going to do it.
Yes, and was it exciting for you again as a writer, seeing, you know, because for Paradise Towers, you know, the main villain, Richard Briers, Mr. Good himself, if you like, that must have been quite a surprise to get someone, I guess, of that caliber, I suppose, in the show.
Well, I was, because with all the Blu-rays, there is now all this correspondence about who was offered to it, I actually wanted T.P. McKenna, who then played Castle, who I think I saw a rather more sinister character than the way Richard played it, which was very, very funny. And I discovered so many archives. Ian Richardson was offered the part, and that's a mind-blowing concept to me. But it would have been totally different. Absolutely. No, I mean, you know, so Richards is very funny and on top of the language and relishing the language, so I don't want to knock it. But
no, of course,
though I think that everybody agrees, and I think eventually even he did, although not publicly. The Coagnon scenes are a bit over the top. Sure. You know, they could have been. Unfortunately, they were shot first. They were the first scenes he did. Right. And I don't think he'd quite got the measure of it, or he wasn't quite. It could have been turned down a bit as a performance. Sure. And it would have been more scarier if it had. The thing I was going to just add is that when you said about the powers that be really were gunning for Doctor Who, one of the interesting things was with Paradise Towers that a lot of the regular fans absolutely loathed it. Right. And the powers that be actually rather liked it.
Yes, I actually have a quote from Jonathan Powell, who was, I believe, the head of drama at that point, I think. Yeah.
He was the head of drama, who was very anti-Doctor Who, and he sort of said, oh, I rather like this one. Can we have more like this? So, so in a way, you've got the paradox. The fans were sort of in apoplexy about how it had destroyed their series, and the head of the drama who didn't like the series was saying, "I think this is a great way forward." You know.
It's just that proof, isn't it? You can't win with Doctor Who. I think you can't please everybody, whether it's the higher ups or some sections of the viewing audience. But I mean, as it stands, I mean, personally, I think Paradise Towers, as mentioned, is such a refreshing story for where it falls in Doctor Who's place. I think it's a fun adventure, lots of memorable characters. And I think over the last 35 years, I think, well, from what I see anyway, you know, like on social media and chatting with friends, people seem to have really come around, not just on Paradise Towers, but that whole season. I think, you know, when the Blu-ray came out a few months ago, I saw people saying, "Oh, you know, we love it. You know, we love how fun it is, how fresh it feels, how in a way light it is in terms of how much fun there is." So I think opinions have really, from what I've seen anyway, seem to have turned around on that section of Who.
I think it has, and also I've talked to people who were younger at that time, you know, in their mid-teens, rather than the people, the very vociferous fans were all in their 20s and 30s. And several of them have said to me, you know, they just loved it. I mean, Gareth Kavanagh, who is runs Cutaway Comics and is doing the this follow-up comic, Paradise Found. He remembers it as a kid, and it's always stayed with him, and he's always wanted to do a comic version of it.
Yes.
But of course, at the time, all we got was the negativity out of the fans.
Sure. Yeah.
It was. I have to say, it was partly JNT's fault, but the atmosphere was a bit poisonous, to be honest.
Yeah, I think when people look back at late 80s Who, I think, like you say, a combination of whether it was the higher-ups on occasion or the like fan publications, or it wasn't the most pleasant time, it seems like, to be working on the programme, in some aspects, I guess.
I mean, for us, honestly, I had a great time. I mean,
yeah.
I've never had so much freedom in my life. And I realised, and I worked after that on a couple of series, Casualty and Casualty. But I realised I would never have the same freedom again.
Sure, yeah. But I think that's partly Doctor Who's format, isn't it? Just because of how you can literally do anything with it, I suppose, which is, I guess, is a writer's dream, right? Saying, here's a story, here's the basic concept, like you say, a guy in a phone box, and he lands somewhere. And from that, it's literally whatever the hell you want it to be. And on that, of course, you came back. You returned the following year to pen The Greatest Show in the Galaxy. So with that one, again, was that Andrew sort of saying, again, that we got the praise from Paradise Towers, we really enjoyed it. Can you write another one for us?
Yeah, it was that they had very different histories, because Paradise Towers was written so fast, there aren't even synopsis plans for episodes 2, 3, and 4, which is extremely unusual in television, which is deeply bureaucratic, to have something commissioned and the BBC parting with money for it without anything on paper.
With no knowledge of it, yes.
Greatest Show, in the way, had a slightly opposite history, which was that, it was, in principle, I was commissioned again right after Paradise Towers, but there was quite a long period in between. And there were quite a few ideas for it, which originally JNT wanted to do something built around the, where was it? Somewhere, Woburn Abbey, I think it was, that had a doctor.
Oh, right.
Around that, which really didn't work. And at that point, he gave the show the title The Greatest Show in the Galaxy. And we all went, no pressure there then.
Yeah. I wonder if that has a double meaning, perhaps.
And then Andrew and I spent quite a lot of time during a series which was built around computer games, which again really didn't work.
Sure.
And then we got into circuses. And at that point, suddenly it was said, this is not going to be a 3-part studio story, which is why we'd come up with all the computers. This is going to be a 4-part story with a whole episode of outside broadcast.
Yes, yeah.
And half of me went, oh, great. Half of me went, oh, great, more money, more time. And the other half went, how the hell am I supposed to do it? So most of the first episode came about getting to the circus.
Yeah.
Which in a way I quite like, because if everything would have been in the circus, you wouldn't have got a sense of how claustrophobic it was. And you wouldn't have known about the characters who were going there, people like the Mags and Captain Cook. You sort of need a bit of time to get to know them before they arrived.
Yes.
But it was there for quite a protracted process. There were a lot of different versions of it. And so it had almost the opposite. I think it's about, I sort of gave them away some time ago, but I think there were about 6 or 7 different synopses. Not all detailed synopses, but the 3 or 4 pages.
Yes.
And of course, when you start writing, it all changes anyway. But but we were struggling at some points to try and make about what we were trying to do. And the other thing about that, oddly, because it's quite a weird script.
Yes.
I think what happened was all the right bits got kept and all the bad bits went away. So it's sort of the good ideas managed to survive all the versions and acquire better ideas, and the really crap bits got lost.
Which is hopefully what you want. I guess when you go through various drafts, you want to filter out all the, all the little niggles.
Absolutely, yes. So
Yes,
it was a much longer process then, therefore.
sure.
Which I guess
Sorry.
which is both good and bad. Half of you loves the pressure, there isn't any time to argue about this, just write it. And the other half is, sometimes you think, oh, well, in Paradise Towers, some of the second half could have been done better.
Sure.
If we'd had more time.
Well, I think what couldn't have been done better for Greatest Show is the casting of the guest stars. I mean, Ian Reddington as the chief clown, Jessica Martin as Mags, T.P. McKenna as the captain. I mean, for those actors, for those characters, I mean, I watched it again recently, and you just think, I can't think of anyone at the, of the time who could have possibly done, Ian especially as the chief clown, all those little, it's the the little mannerisms he does with the hands and those lovely big eyes he has. I think it's that proof, I think, where some actors, when they're given a role like that's quite weird. I think there's the temptation to make it as big and loud as possible because it's weird, whereas I love how Ian's quite quiet the whole way through. He's very It's all in the movements and the and it's still unnerving, for a 30-plus-year-old piece of telly. That some of those moments with him are really unnerving, and I think that's a testament to, well, not just your writing of the character, but his portrayal, how he brought it to life.
Absolutely. I don't get cross about many things to do with comments, but I do get a bit fed up when people say, oh, he makes such an impression as the chief clown, even though he doesn't have many lines. And I always want to say he made the impression because he didn't have too many lines.
Exactly, yeah.
And in some way, because I'd always had the concept, because I think when I was talking to Andrew about clowns, he was thinking more of the sort of Coco the Clown, Ronald McDonald sort of clown.
Yes.
No, I remember when I was a kid, there were these really scary, elegant figures with white faces and glitter costume who never got dirty. They just ordered the other clowns around.
Yes,
and
yeah.
That's so I always had that image in my mind. And even I was thinking sometimes I was writing it, well, he's not saying very much.
Yeah.
And then I realized, actually, no, that's right, because the image is so powerful. And it gave Ian the space to do things in it, which was fantastic,
Absolutely. One character, though, I guess, who did have a lot to say, partly of the character is, of course, the captain, who loves talking about all his adventures and all his stories. And so, were you happy then to get T.P. McKenna after you said you did want him originally for Paradise Towers?
I was absolutely delighted. Absolutely. I mean, it really, with Paradise Towers, you could say, there were certain elements which could have been better. Some of the casting could have been a bit stronger. Some of the costuming could have been a bit more on. The set is very good. Some of the lighting. In case of Greatest Show, I mean, it's well cast. It's very well designed. The costumes are terrific. The direction is terrific. The music is good. It's almost faultless. I never want to go back, and there's nothing in that I want to say, please, could we do it another way?
Yes, yeah.
Absolutely perfect.
Yeah. And I suppose you were almost under threat of it not going ahead because, rather infamously, the BBC found asbestos in their studios, which is never good. So obviously they found a solution, that the benefit of the story, I guess, largely taking place in a circus tent. But when that news first trickled down to you, we've lost the studio time, were you a bit worried that it might never happen, or?
Well, I was quite sort of protected from it, really. I really didn't. I heard of the murmurings, but I wasn't really told much until actually they basically John Nathan Turner, and I think it was the designer David Lasky who worked out that if we used the car park at Elstree, we could build a tent there. And so that was, I sort of knew by the time they sort of spared me it could be cancelled.
Oh, okay. Yes, yeah.
And I think it was hugely to the advantage of the story, because
absolutely
the tent looks like a real tent with a real tent acoustic, and it would be otherwise have been inside a studio, and I think it would have been less exciting, less raw. I mean, it was a nightmare for everybody because of the, you were there on the car park, so there were planes going over, there were vans coming by, and so the number of times the shooting had to be suspended or something had to be retaken was high. It's high pressure. But,
Of course, yeah.
I think I artistically, I think it was very much for the good.
Yeah. I mean, I think the whole story, like as you say, the look, the design, the feel, the characters, it all it blends wonderfully. And I think it embodies that sort of what we're saying about, I guess, the core of Doctor Who, about that there being just this central adventure and how the main characters weave their way into it. And I think it works a treat. So, two great stories in my opinion.
Thank you very much.
So after that, then obviously Doctor Who ran on for another year before it was finally axed, or sorry, as the BBC said, rested in inverted commas. But was there ever, before it got axed, was there ever any talk about you potentially coming back for a third, or did you feel in yourself, you thought, I've sort of done that now, I want to do something else?
Well, a bit of both. On one hand, I'd been in Andrew's core group of writers, I'd been very, very lucky because I'd had, in the first 2 seasons, 2 4-part series. So it was only fair that all those other people, Ian and Ben and Graham, should get a crack of the whip rather than me and, bringing in Mark Platt and Rona. So I never expected to be part of a 3rd season.
Yeah,
nobody knew, I think, that was going to be the last season. And also, you're right, I didn't necessarily want to be always a Doctor Who writer.
Yes, of course.
And so I started doing other series like Casualty and House of Elliot. So that's what happened.
So on Casualty, just as an example, because I'm a Casualty fan myself, and obviously that show is, as we all know, it's a recurring drama. It's been on the air for 35 plus years. So obviously you said you had that freedom with Doctor Who. Obviously, I guess Casualty in some sense is a bit more regimented, in the sense, like, I guess, is it you have to have an accident of the week, as it were? You have to sort of continue whatever the drama is with some of the regulars. Like, what was that experience like writing for something like Casualty?
Well, it is more disciplined. I mean, one of the first, you are given the running elements of what's happening with Charlie and Duffy and blah, blah, and what you've got to work in. And what you actually had to do, at least when I was doing it, was you prepared quite a detailed synopsis with a time scale. Because it's actually, if you're intercutting between 4 or 5 stories, it's pretty easy to get the time scale wrong. So somebody's walked down a corridor, and at the same time in some other stories, somebody's gone up a mountain, fallen down the mountain, and you've got to make sure that it all holds together. I mean, because I'm not really very good at running format or soap, I just can't do it. It's
sure.
But what I liked about Casualty at that point is the stories of the week were your stories. So you could actually, and you could start and finish them how you liked. So you've got 3 stories and what you had met. And of course, they all had to be cleared, particularly like, oh no, we did that story 3 years ago or whatever. But once you've done that, you could create the characters and their story. I mean, the one I most liked that I did was because I thought it started off with a married couple having a quarrel about a holiday brochure. And the husband said, right, I'm going out and taking the dog for a walk. The next scene, he went out and a bomb exploded, killing the dog and sending him to Casualty. And I thought, wow, that's good. And the rest of the story was about why that had happened, and it was animal activists had identified him as the doctor working in a research laboratory with animals, but she'd actually put it under the wrong car. So it was great, but I thought, wow, I was quite pleased with that one, because with Casualty, the problem is everybody knows that every story is going to end up in an accident of some sort. But half the time you think, I wonder what's going to happen with this one, and slightly wrong-footing people about what's going to happen to who is part of the game. And I was quite pleased with that one, because, you just see it coming at all.
Yeah. I don't envy the writers now. If you say back then, they said, oh, we did this story before. After 35 years, coming up with new accidents must be a challenge, I imagine.
Well, I was when I did it, it was still only 13 episodes a year.
Yes, yeah.
In fact, the year I did it first, it used to be 12, and they added one more episode, and that was the episode I got. And I can remember at that point they were talking about expanding, making it into a weekly soap, and the then medical officer, and we're going back to some point in the 90s, probably said, well, I have looked through the book, and I have to tell you that we have done every conceivable accident or thing that Casualty already. Yes. And there it is, years later, and it's because actually it isn't really about the accidents; it's about people. And sometimes people get very excited about, some rare infectious disease or something that somebody's got. And the answer is they wouldn't go to Casualty; they go straight into intensive care.
Exactly.
So you don't have. I don't really watch Holby, but Holby goes a bit more into that sort of side, doesn't it?
Yeah, which of course, sadly, is ending next March, I believe, as part of a restructuring or something. I don't know what the official line is, but yeah, Holby's going, unfortunately. But I think Casualty's sticking around. I think it's still popular, it seems. People still watch it, so may it stay.
It's a good format, no doubt.
It is a good format. Just because I forgot to mention earlier, just to bring it back to Who for a second, of course, last year, you penned a sort of prequel to Greatest Show in the Galaxy for Big Finish, the Psychic Circus. What was that like for you then, revisiting this world, these characters over 30 years since the TV story?
It was quite strange. It came about because I went to Gallifrey 1, the big science fiction in LA, and I met some of the people to do with Big Finish, and I was there with Jessica Martyn, who is a mate, and she said, why doesn't Stephen do a story about the prequel to Greatest Show in the Galaxy? And everyone, including me, oh, that's not a bad idea. It was something I felt there was something to be done with the process of how these people got corrupted and sucked into it. So I felt there was something to say. Oddly, since then, I've actually done a few things. I've done with Cutaway Comics. There are going to be a couple of audio dramas, short audio dramas for the people who back the Kickstarter. So I've done a story about a Kang, I've done a story about a Resi, and I've done a story about the great architect himself. And then for this new short story anthology, I've done one about the caretaker. So I have actually gone, once I'd gone back into the world, I sort of it was quite interesting, with the other ones I was actually asked, but it didn't seem so daunting as it did when I started doing Psychic Circus.
Sure. And is that nice for you then, in a way, like you said earlier, you don't consider yourself primarily a science fiction writer, but you find it all right, you enjoy sort of just dipping your toes back into like the realm of Doctor Who every now and then?
Well, it's a lot. I think it's probably because, when I did Psychic Circus, it's the first time I'd written anything about Who for 35 years or so.
Yes, yeah.
So it's quite, and I think the visiting Gallifrey 1 did have quite an impact on me, because my own attitude towards the work, Doctor Who work, has changed, because after it closed down, rested, or whatever we want to say, you weren't really encouraged to feel proud of the fact that you'd written for Doctor Who.
Sure.
And in fact, if you were pitching for certain jobs, it was like, okay, you've written for Doctor Who, tell us about Casualty. And so you sort of got into the habit of thinking, and the fans that officially hated it, that really the stuff was gone. And it sort of started a bit before the new series started up. There were a few articles people wrote saying, being much more favourable about it. But of course, it was the return of Doctor Who, which I think sparked off the interest in Classic Who.
Yes, yeah.
And people revisiting them. And I think, going to Gallifrey was very interesting. I mean, it's the first time I'd met people doing cosplay on my characters.
That must have been quite a surreal sight. Yeah.
Quite surreal. And, people were coming up to me and saying, thank you very much for writing this, and asking me little questions about this. And at the end of it, we all had to come on stage and say goodbye. And I thought we'd just go and get to wave. And when we got on stage, I realized we're all going to have to say something. One by one, the microphone was passed around. Yeah. And there were all the younger, cooler guys saying, hey, Gallifrey, it's been a blast. Yeah. And the audience getting, yeah. What am I getting? And I ended up saying, thank you very much for asking me. I'm actually very touched that something I wrote 35 years ago is still remembered.
Yeah. No, I think that's lovely as well.
And I think that's sort of, that was part of a change in attitude to me. I mean, come on, embrace it. It's fantastic that something you wrote all that time ago is still remembered and people are interested in it. Be nice to yourself and be nice to them.
Yes. Yeah. I think it's like you said earlier, it's like when you see, we were talking about seeing your name on the TV screen saying, oh, I wrote this. It's sort of that life beyond you, I guess, like you said. So I think with Doctor Who, like, people take a lot of the stories, like you say, to their hearts in terms of what it means for them, if it was their first episode or one they enjoyed. And yes. I think the appreciation, obviously, sadly, you'll always have like a vocal minority who are primarily negative, and that's yes. that's their corner. But I think on the whole, the people I've experienced anyway are genuinely very appreciative. And I mean, like you said about the new Who sort of kickstarting the interest, I got into Doctor Who through the revival. Yes. It was my dad who said, oh, you should watch this, because he remembered the original. And then, when Christopher Eccleston became David Tennant, I was like, who's this? And he said, oh, yeah, there's 8 more of these. And I was like, what? So then getting into Classic Who as a 9-10-year-old, I thought was the perfect time, because, your imagination's so rife that I wasn't bothered about, outdated effects or sets or anything like that. If the stories were good, if it captured my imagination. And that's how I fell in love with Classic Who. And I'd argue your stories are no exception to that. I watched those as a kid, not again, not bothered that they were old, quote unquote old or had old production. That didn't bother me. Like, the characters were interesting, they were gripping. It was fresh and exciting. So yeah, I think a lot of us have that appreciation now.
Yeah, I think it has changed quite a lot. And I mean, actually, the other thing about Greatest Show is that John Nathan Toll was very clear on how difficult it was to do monsters. And in that show, there are hardly any monsters. The things that are really scary are the robot clowns.
Yes.
And the robot clowns were very good acrobats, all wearing the same mask. And I mean, I think it's an effect that's been used quite a few times in Who now. But, robots like that are scary in the way that hasn't dated. Whereas, the monster made out of bits of elastic and whatever.
Yeah.
Really, in a way.
Yes, yeah. But even those ones, like you say, the ones made out of elastic and papier-mâché, I think even now people look and it makes them smile in a way, because it's that fondness, and I think I think what I've noticed, that the conversation changes. I think a lot more people who were like quick to jump and say, oh, well, doesn't this look terrible, or isn't this bad? Yeah. I think there's a greater understanding, but also appreciation of the constraints that Who was under back then, especially like you were saying in the late 80s, when you're not being necessarily greatly supported by the corporation that you're making the program for, not to mention the time and the budget. But considering those stories turned out the way they did, despite all of that, I think is a testament to, yourself and everyone who worked on it.
Yes, I mean, J&T was not great on scripts at all, but he let us get on with it. He gave Andrew a lot of freedom, but he was brilliant at the other side. He was a production manager. He was a great problem solver. The classic one being obviously the remaking of Greatest Show on Car Park, but also all the way through he would be thinking about it. And It's interesting. I only discovered this quite later. In fact, a lot of the budget for Doctor Who at that point came from BBC Enterprises.
Oh, okay.
Because BBC Enterprises knew, even at that stage, that they could make money out of Doctor Who and selling.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So they gave him, so quite a lot of the budget came from that source. And for whatever his faults, JNT was way ahead of thinking about how, he did the American convention circuit. He actually, what is now a very profitable industry for the BBC, taking this stuff around the world and flogging it and selling spin-offs and stuff. At the time, I think they thought JNT was a bit vulgar because he did these things, but he was smart. He was ahead of his time.
Yeah, I think to JNT, he was a fairly big factor in the show lasting as long as it did back then. I think, with all the troubles that were going on, he was sort of steadfast in keeping it going. But absolutely. Just the last thing I wanted to touch on Who before we move into some of your work in radio and theatre is another quote I found from Jonathan Powell at the time. You might have heard of this already. Like you said, he thought it, he enjoyed Paradise Towers. He thought it was first rate. There's a quote where he apparently, I can't remember if it said he wrote to, I think he passed this on to JNT, I think, saying, can we do, like you said, can we do more of this? But the quote says, Paradise Towers, but with the Daleks. And I know what you said. I know what you said about the Daleks earlier. But hypothetically, we're back in 1987. If JNT had come to you and said, look, the higher ups have really liked it. Can we do a Paradise Towers sequel story with the Daleks? Would you have given that the go ahead, or would you have been like, no?
Well, I think at that point I'd have gone yes, because what about the commissions don't grow on trees,
No, absolutely, yes.
I would have given it a bash, but I think I would have struggled.
Sure.
I really would have struggled with that one, but I would have certainly tried.
Yeah, an interesting. Hey, maybe Big Finish, if you're listening. Hypothetical, what if the Daleks at Paradise Towers? Yes. Right. Well, let's move on to some of the other mediums then. Like we said at the beginning, you've worked in countless mediums. So, radio being one of them, you've helmed a lot of radio productions, adaptations. Yes. Do you prefer like working in that medium to television, or do you think it's all the same but just a different series of pros and cons in a way?
Well, I think they are very different. The thing about radio is you get messed around much less.
Sure.
I think it's getting it's starting to get a bit too bureaucratic, sadly. But at that point, once you had an idea commissioned, your producer was also your director, was also your script editor and your casting director. One person.
Yes. Yeah.
And if you got on with that person, had a good working relationship, you would go ahead, you would make it, and the chances of it not getting on the air were minimal.
Yes, yeah.
So from that point of view, it was a much more, what's the word? In that way, there wasn't the extra aggro. It was a more pleasant working environment, and I worked with some wonderful producers, so it's very good fun. As I say, I think ultimately theatre is more my love than radio.
For sure.
But you do get a lot of free. I'm very lucky to have done a lot of original plays and particularly adaptations. I've done a great deal, so it's been. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah. But just before we move on to theatre, I think it's an interesting question to ask. Like, nowadays, 2021, how do you see the future of radio drama? Because this question was I wrote this as my dissertation at university.
Right.
Because obviously you've got your long-standing ones, programs like The Archers, which seemingly are going to run forever, and you've got obviously companies like Big Finish and other independent sources. But in terms of you look at the main radio stations and how vastly reduced the sort of airtime is for dramas or original bits. I just think it's an interesting question to pose. And for someone like yourself who's worked a lot in that field, do you think the future of radio drama is bright, or do you think it's in a bit of an odd state?
Well, it's interesting because I've just I wrote a book in 2013 called "So You Want to Write Radio Drama" with the late and lamented Claire Grove, one of my favourite producers, and I just done a bit of research and written a short update to go into the next edition of this book, because between 2013 and now the picture has changed a lot.
Yes.
And that a lot of the stuff we provide, we describe in terms of BBC radio drama, some of those slots have gone.
Yes.
Somebody actually estimated that in the last 5 years, something like 40% of the output has gone.
God.
So lots of repeats, etc. On the other hand, the book is basically built around the idea that if you want to get into radio drama, you really have to write a 45-minute original play. That's your original goal, because none of the other things will happen until you've done that. And that slot is still there, and there are still slots for new writers. But in terms of you're saying, so in terms of the BBC, audio drama is, I would say, in decline for that reason.
Sure.
On the other hand, audio drama as such is hugely expanding.
Yes, yeah.
And it's taken off, particularly in the States, where it wasn't popular since the 30s, really. And I gather it tends to be called podcasts rather than...
Yes.
Yeah. In fact, the term radio drama, I realise now, is probably defunct. It's all audio drama.
Sure.
Which is a realistic reflection of how people listen to it. And there is a lot going on. But as you said quite correctly, most of it is within sort of genre.
Yes, yeah.
So there's a lot of science fiction through people like Big Finish. There's a lot of stuff going on there. A lot of things like biographies of famous stars, this sort of stuff. And the interest really is in long form stuff. Somebody like Audible, I was told, very open to ideas, but they're looking for ideas that make 10-hour dramas.
Yes.
They're not really, there's not really any place there for one-offs.
Yeah.
No, it's really the way BBC went this way years ago. The one-off dramas are a thing completely of the past. Sure. So that's quite interesting. You get the phenomenon that the recent Neil Gaiman stuff that Dirk Maggs has done, I mean, has been huge in the States. And it's apparently, the first time there have been billboards advertising an audio drama on Sunset Boulevard since 1930, something like that. So I think this is part of the pandemic effect, is people were drawn back to audio drama and to audio books. And it's a thing where you can go around listening to them, can't you? You don't have to sit in front of a screen. And so I think in that way, but it is what they're looking for is quite specific, I think, much more specific, than the BBC's drama, which is very eclectic in its output. I mean, horror is another field where there's a lot or, Son of Game of Thrones, things like this, there's a lot of that sort of stuff. So it's out there and expanding, but not on the traditional model.
Yeah, and I suppose, like you say, maybe it's those original one-offs, like you said, that maybe get lost in the mix. Because a lot of the stuff that you say is catered to drama, like you said correctly, a lot of it, I guess, is catered to, if it's fair to say, like pre-existing brands. Obviously, like big, like Doctor Who or Game of Thrones or whatever it is. Like they're brands that people already recognise. So I guess they might feel more inclined to check something like that out than, say, if I'd written a 45-minute, completely original, no one's ever heard of it. I guess their thinking is people might be less inclined to listen to that, but yeah.
And also there seems to be that people want quantity as well as quality. I mean, I can't remember the name of the series, but one of the people I talked to when I was getting the information said Audible had done a very glitzy 5-hour series starring David Tennant and I can't remember who, which they had big hopes for, and it didn't really take off. And when they did the research, one of the things that people were saying was, well, it was only 5 hours long.
Only?
Yeah, for our money, we want something that lasts 10 hours.
Oh, sure, yes.
So people are into the immersive, the blitz, the whole thing of I want to be in this world for a significant amount of time.
Yes, yeah.
It's not something I'm good at or interested in, but that is the way the world is. So I think that from probably from when you did your thesis, it's quite a shift in things.
Absolutely. I mean, I did that, it was about 4 or 5 years ago. So like you say, already in those 4 or 5 years, so much as, like you say, some of the slots on BBC Radio 4 or 4 Extra that hosted radio drama are gone now. And just the landscape. So I guess as you say, it's nice that it's still around and there's this boom in a way for consuming audio content, if you like. But a shame in a way that those more original, those more out there pieces that would have gotten the time of day maybe don't necessarily get that same affection anymore. That is a bit of a shame.
I think it's sad because the cuts in the BBC are not because people who make drama don't want to make drama. It's to do, license fee politics.
Of course, yeah.
But it's very sad. It's a period in which audio drama is really taking off. The BBC is actually contracting its audio output,
Yeah.
And the people I know, the producers who are active in that field, if they're not in the BBC, are very busy, but they're not working for the BBC.
Yeah. Yeah, it's down to other. I think it's no longer. I guess the BBC is no longer like the sole monolith of radio or audio drama, if you like, as it perhaps was 30, 40 years ago. And it was you've got all these independent companies now, which is great. Again, it's great, and hopefully audiences will buy into that as time goes on. But
even between when I can date when what we wrote in 2013 is out of date in 2021.
Yeah, only 8 years. So it shows how fast it all moves, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, but moving up. Lastly, let's move on to theatre then. As you mentioned, you have a new play coming up that'll go around next year. So you said theatre's like sort of the biggest love you have, I suppose, for the performing industry. Is that again something you've had since you were a young lad, or is it something that came around later on?
Theatre was always what I went to school, I wrote little plays, but I also enjoyed acting, and I did a lot of acting and writing at university. So that's where it all started for me.
Yes, yeah.
And there is something about the immediacy of theatre that you really don't get anywhere else.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes that's terrifying, as you know. If things aren't going right, or in a performance of something I'd written, one of the actors had a blackout and cut a third of the script.
Oh no!
The next half hour was spent trying with everybody else trying to get back to the point where he, you get all that sort of stuff.
Yes,
But it's still, when it's working, there's nothing like it really. That's sort of what I feel.
Like you say, it's that live reaction, isn't it? Like when it all falls into place and people are, I guess, connecting with the play or the characters or whatever it is you're wanting them to get out of it, rather than, we've all had performances or gone to shows where, in the first 20 minutes you're like, oh, this isn't going so well, but then you're like, oh, but I've still got to perform the other hour, so you've got to get through it somehow. But
absolutely, no. I mean, we've also all sat in the theatre where there were 3 of you watching a play that is not very good and thinking, can I leave at the interval? And leave nobody in the audience. There is all that side to it. But I remember also, the other thing is, although it's terrifying, there's also the immediacy. I mean, I remember this when I started doing things like Casualty. I'd got in advance, the video cassette, and I watched it. It was there. It was never going to change.
Yeah.
when it went out, if I sat in my room in my home, and I'd usually try and get a few people around just to make a bit of a sense of occasion.
Yes, yeah.
It didn't matter whether it was just me there doing the ironing and watching it. At that point, Casualty had audiences of something like 17 million.
Yes, crazy numbers.
It made absolutely no effect on what was in front of me at all.
Yeah. Oh,
it was there, it was done, it was finished. And there was the experience. Whereas in theatre, even if you've got 10 people in the audience, everyone is a different live experience.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's wonderful medium to work in theatre. Yes. I won't fault that at all.
Would you rather work in theatre than do voiceovers?
So, it's a question, isn't it? I mean, I think like yourself, I'd say theatre's my biggest love. You know, that's where I sort of started getting into acting. I think I agree with you on the immediacy of it. Even if it goes wrong, like it's such a thrill because every night, even though you're doing the same show, every night, like you say, can be a completely different experience for the actors, for the audience. And there's a certain thrill about that, I think.
Yeah,
and like you say, when it all goes right, when it all, falls into place and people connect with the bits you want them to connect to, and they, afterwards they'll say, "Oh, we really loved it." That it doesn't beat that feeling somehow, that, as you say, because they've been there, they've watched it, they've seen you, they've been right there in front of you.
Yes.
Yeah, so I think I'd probably I'd like to work more in theatre. Voiceovers I'd absolutely do if they came around, but I think in terms of pure enjoyment and as a skill sharpener as well, I think you can't beat live theatre really. Above all else, it's the best place, I think.
Yes. No, we agree about that.
Yes, yeah, all in sync with that one. So if you'd like to, tell us a bit about the new play that's coming. What's the sort of general synopsis, if you like?
Well, yes, it's quite difficult to describe. I mean, basically, it's a comedy, but it's about a woman dying.
Right.
And it was actually, original inspiration was my mum's death, because my mum was very unusual. She had all her faculties when she died. She had her memory, she had her sight, she had her smell, she had everything. She knew exactly what was going on, and she also was absolutely clear that she was dying.
Yeah.
And so, although it's not an autobiographical piece in that way, that was the inspiration. And I thought, I've never really seen a play with somebody like that at the centre of it. Plays tend to be about all the people around the deathbed.
Yes.
Squabbling and blah. Or alternatively, now, of course, there's a lot of exploration of dementia and what the world of dementia and how that affects people and their perception. So that's the starting point. And, it's built around, the main character is on stage all the time. And I always hoped it would be a tempting role for what Penelope would call an actress of a certain age. And because there aren't that many for them. And fortunately, when it got to her, she just simply said, "I want to do this on the stage." And 15 months later, here we are.
Yes, after long last.
And in a way, it couldn't have happened much because of COVID. It couldn't have happened much faster than opening next February. Really, it would. Well, we just have to fingers crossed that things don't come back.
Of course, yeah.
So that's basically what the play's about.
Yeah. I'd like to see. I'd like to see it even more now, because that concept. I mean, my grandmother is 99 currently, and I guess sort of like you say about your mum, she still has all her faculties. She's got a memory. She's very sound of mind. She's as active as she can be. Yeah. But I think she's also very. She's not in ill health, touch wood, currently, the time of recording. But I think she's very accepting of the fact, she's 99, and that realistically, her time, if you like, is winding down. But she makes no sort of, secret of that. She's not afraid of that, it seems. She's very upfront about it. So, yeah, but I agree with you. That sort of having a person like that as the forefront of a play, I know I haven't seen that. And like you say, it's the typical, someone's dying and it's all the family around, like, who's getting the money, or what are we going to do about this, or da-da-da-da-da. Yeah, so...
Exactly. So that's it. And I mean, I hope it's quite... Penelope's playing the lead, it will be. I hope a lot of it's quite funny. It's not.
Yes, yeah.
She's quite a witty, sparky woman at the centre of it. So it's not filled with self-pity.
Sure, yeah. I think that's what some people, well, I guess people steer away from it, I think, because some would argue it's uncomfortable. But I think when people, just from experience, with other people, like when people approach, I guess, the end of their life or towards the end, like a lot of people, I guess, can use humor to sort of, to process it or get through it. And I think, obviously, that it can be uncomfortable to a lot of people. But I think in terms of a play and stuff, I'm glad that you're saying Penelope will probably make it humorous in places as well, because I think it's important to get that across if that's how, certain people, or in this case, characters, process their situation. Why not? Why wouldn't they not make a joke about it to try and lift them or lift someone else? So
yes, absolutely. I mean, she's a spiky character, so in part of it she's doing this to keep at bay coming to terms with certain things about her life, but exactly, I mean, exactly. Well, I just agree with what you're saying about how it should be, how it should be done. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, again, for anyone listening, the play opens next February and it goes on a 9-week tour. What I'll do is I'll find the list of where it's going and I'll put it in the video description, so people should be able to see that and hopefully attend it. And as I say, I'd hope to attend it myself at some point on the tour, because
what I'll do is I'll send you the press release, because that gives that gives all the dates and the contact for booking tickets throughout.
That'd be fantastic. Yeah, thank you so much, Stephen. Well, I think we'll start to wrap things up there, but just before you go, aside from the play, is there any sort of upcoming projects that you could talk about that you've got upcoming for the future?
Well, there's a short story book, Build High for Happiness, which is about, which collection, but also next year, Verse Press are going to bring out a volume of my monologues, which will be the ones inspired by Doctor Who. Some of them are inspired by, I read the Old Testament as part of my project, and I've written some stories about some of the weirder bits of the Old Testament. And then the third part is a collection of the monologues that I've written for radio for people like Sian Phillips and Bernard Cribbin and Dora Brown. So that's coming out in next autumn. And the other thing that's coming up, I work with a company called the Weaver Dance Company, these are pieces which explore the early history of dance drama in Britain. And so we've got that project's happening in January. Yeah. So there's still things going on.
Keep him busy. That's what we all want in this industry, isn't it? To keep busy.
I hope the same for you too.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, got some things lined up, but as long as always see what's coming next. That's the key thing.
Absolutely, that's something.
Awesome. Well, just before you go, then, Stephen, where can the listeners find you or your work? Any websites or social medias you'd like to shout out?
I do have a website which sort of keeps up to date on, well, nearly up to date, not always completely up to date on what I do. So that's fairly easy to find. www.stephenwyatt.co.uk.
Wonderful. Excellent. Well, go and check out the website, folks. All of Stephen's work is on there. You can find out a lot more information. And if you've been listening to this podcast, thank you very much. Hope you've enjoyed it. If you're listening on YouTube, please leave us a like and subscribe as well. We've got new podcasts every week. And if you're listening just on Spotify, Apple Music, anything like that, again, thank you very much. Please give us a follow for new episodes every week. So all that's left for me to say is, once again, Stephen, thank you so much for coming on today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Okay, thank you very much for asking me.
No problem. And for everyone listening, I will see you next time.